You know that sinking feeling when someone holding a clipboard tells you that you're suddenly not allowed to do the one thing that actually keeps people safe? Yeah, that's exactly what our HOA did to me right before the very first ice storm of the year. They banned my salt spreader from the neighborhood roads, then stood back and literally watched their own board members wipe out like cartoon characters on black ice. The wild part wasn't just the falling. Somehow, they managed to turn it into a lawsuit, and it spiraled into the most absurd legal mess I've ever witnessed. Last winter, I was the guy people quietly relied on. Not officially, not written anywhere, just reality. I'm up early most mornings. I've got a decent pickup truck, and I own a small tow-behind salt spreader that I normally use for my own driveway and for my parents' place across town. The spreader isn't some industrial beast, just a basic hopper with a spinner underneath, the same kind you see behind small landscaping trucks. But in our neighborhood, it might as well have been an entire snowplow fleet. Our streets are private. That's the key detail. The city doesn't salt them, doesn't plow them, doesn't even pretend to care. The HOA collects dues and hires contractors as needed, which is HOA language for maybe, if the board feels like it, and if a contractor actually answers the phone. So every year, when the forecast started whispering about freezing rain, I followed the same routine. I'd salt my driveway, then slowly drive the main loop of the neighborhood, hitting the worst spots: the hill by the mailboxes, the curve near the pond, the shady stretch where the sun never really reaches. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I've seen what black ice does. I've helped a neighbor whose car slid straight into a curb. I've watched an older guy 2 doors down limp for weeks after a bad fall. And honestly, people appreciated it. They'd wave. One time, someone left a Starbucks gift card in my mailbox with a sticky note that said, "Thanks for saving our necks." Little things like that. Then the HOA got a new board president. Her name was Marlene, but nobody called her that, at least not to her face. Behind closed doors, she was Karen, the kind of woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had the posture of someone who always believed she was being recorded. Perfect blowout hair, blindingly white sneakers, and that HOA lanyard hanging from her neck like it was a badge of authority. The first time I realized she was going to be a problem was at a community meeting in the clubhouse. She stood up, smiled a little too hard, and said, "We are going to restore order, in a neighborhood full of working families and retirees." She started small: trash cans, basketball hoops, the color of outdoor curtains. Then winter rolled in, and I got my first email from the HOA address, her signature neatly stamped at the bottom. Subject: unauthorized road treatment. It read like I'd committed a felony. "Dear homeowner, it has come to the board's attention that you've been applying de-icing substances to HOA-managed roadways. This is not permitted without board approval due to liability risks and chemical runoff concerns." I read it twice, convinced it had to be a mistake. Liability risks from salt? I replied calmly. Explained I wasn't dumping industrial chemicals. Just standard rock salt, the same stuff any contractor uses. I even offered to show them the bag and the spreader settings. I said I'd happily coordinate with the HOA to do it safely. Her reply came back within 10 minutes, like she'd been waiting. "No, you are to cease immediately. The board will handle road conditions." That was the moment my stomach tightened, because I knew exactly what "the board will handle it" meant in real life. They'd sent out an email telling everyone to use caution, and then wait for the sun to fix the problem. I still didn't want conflict, so I did what any normal person would do. I walked over to Marlene's house the next afternoon. Hers was one of the larger homes near the entrance, with a perfectly symmetrical wreath and a driveway so clean it looked vacuumed. She opened the door like she already hated me. I smiled. "Hey, Marlene, I got your email. I just wanted to talk and make sure we're on the same page. The storm's coming in 2 days." She didn't invite me inside. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I'm aware of the forecast. I'm just saying the hill near the mailboxes is dangerous. If we saw it ahead of time." "No!" She cut in, eyes narrowing. "You don't get a freelance on HOA property." "Freelance?" I laughed a little because it sounded ridiculous. Her expression didn't change. If someone slips, if someone crashes, if someone claims injury, do you know who gets sued? The HOA. And then we all pay. I tried to keep it friendly. But if no one salts, someone will slip. She lifted her chin. The HOA will hire a professional service. That's what dues are for. We will not have random homeowners spreading substances on our roads. Random homeowner. Like I hadn't lived there for 6 years. I nodded slowly, choosing my words. Okay, when is the service coming? She hesitated. Just half a second, but enough for me to notice. We'll coordinate, she said too quickly. That pause told me everything. There was no service. There was no plan. There was just control. I left her porch with that strange mix of anger and dread. Not, I'm going to fight you, anger. More like, we're about to watch something stupid happen, and I can't stop it, dread. That night, the weather report got worse. Not snow, freezing rain. The kind that coats everything in glass and turns neighborhoods into skating rinks. My wife looked at me while we were making dinner. Are you going to salt? I stare at my plate. They told me I'm not allowed. She raised an eyebrow. So what happens when someone falls? I didn't answer right away, because I'd already imagined it. The hill, the curve, the walkway to the clubhouse, all of it coated in ice. I picture an ambulance trying to get in while cars slid sideways. The next morning, my neighbor Greg texted me. You salting today? Storm's going to be nasty. I typed back, HOA bandit. He replied with one word. What? Within an hour, it felt like the whole neighborhood knew. People stopped me while I walked the dog. Is it true? Why would they ban it? Who decided that? And the more I heard their concern, the heavier it felt. This wasn't about my pride. This was about safety. Around noon, another HOA email went out. This one to everyone. Subject, winter weather update. It was full of cheerful corporate language. The board is monitoring conditions closely. Residents are advised to limit travel during icy conditions. Please wear proper footwear. No mention of salt. No contractor schedule. Just wear proper footwear. That's when it hit me. Marlene wasn't just banning my salt spreader. She was betting the weather would prove her right. She wanted to show the neighborhood that she, and only she, controlled what happened on HOA property. And if no one got hurt, she'd claim victory. But the storm didn't care about HOA politics. By late afternoon, the temperature dropped fast. Rain started tapping the windows, gentle at first, then steady. I stepped outside and felt the air, sharp and metallic, the kind that stings your nose. Within 30 minutes, my front steps were slick. I walked to the curb and looked down the street. It was already shining. Black ice doesn't look dramatic. That's why it's terrifying. It just makes everything gleam, like it's been polished. In that reflection, I saw headlights creeping along the main loop, cars moving like scared animals. Then my phone buzzed. Dude, another neighbor texted. Someone just slid near the pond. Not a crash, but almost hit the curb. Where's the salt? I stared at the message, thumb hovering, and felt the exact moment this flipped from annoying HOA drama into something serious. The clubhouse was hosting a board meeting that evening. Marlene and the board members would be walking from their cars down those same icy sidewalks, acting like everything was under control. I looked at my truck in the driveway. I looked at the salt spreader, sitting there like a silent solution. For a second, I was tempted. Just hook it up. Do it anyway. Deal with the consequences later. Then I imagined Marlene filming me from her porch, calling the police, telling everyone I was tampering with HOA property. So instead, I did the only thing I could. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and started recording the road in front of my house. How slick it was. How my boots slid even when I moved carefully. I panned to my laptop screen to the HOA email that said, "Cease immediately." I didn't rant. I didn't narrate. I just documented. Something in my gut told me this would end in blame. And if the ice hurt someone, Marlene would never admit she caused it. She'd point at me, As the rain turned into a faint crackling glaze on the trees, the streetlights reflected off the road like a mirror. Then, right on cue, I watched Marlene's SUV pull out of her driveway toward the clubhouse, slow and careful, like she already knew. A few minutes later, 2 more cars followed, board members, and that's when the first scream echoed down the street. Not a horror movie scream, just the sharp yelp of someone who lost their footing and realized gravity doesn't negotiate. My heart slammed as I turned toward the sound. It came from the direction of the clubhouse. Standing there in freezing rain, I realized the HOA had just turned our neighborhood into a lawsuit waiting to happen, and the people about to pay for it were walking straight into the ice they refused to treat. The scream wasn't the last one. I started jogging toward the clubhouse, careful with every step, my phone still recording without me even thinking about it. The rain had fully. The sidewalks now, a thin, glassy shell coating the concrete. I could see it and feel it with every step, each foot sliding just a little farther than it should. My heart wasn't pounding from fear anymore. It was pounding from inevitability. As I got closer, headlights illuminated a scene that would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. One of the board members, Tom, the treasurer, was sitting flat on the sidewalk, legs stretched out, palms pressed behind him, staring down at the ground like it had personally betrayed him. His wife stood a few feet away, frozen in place, hands hovering uselessly in the air. "I just stepped out of the car," he kept repeating. "I just stepped out." Marlene was there too. Of course she was. She stood perfectly still near the clubhouse entrance, arms rigid at her sides, face locked into that forced calm she used whenever things slipped out of her control. Her bright white sneakers were already soaked, the soles shiny with ice. "Everyone needs to be careful," she snapped, her voice sharp and managerial. No sudden movements. I almost laughed. Almost. Another board member arrived, Linda. She opened her car door, put one foot down, and immediately slid backward, landing half inside the vehicle with a breathless grunt. That's when real panic set in. Phones came out. Someone shouted about calling 911. Someone else yelled that the roads were a death trap. I stayed back, filming quietly, documenting everything. The untreated sidewalk, the untouched roadway, the complete absence of salt, warning cones, or contractor trucks. I caught Marlene pacing in tiny, careful steps, clearly terrified of falling herself. Then she saw me, her eyes locked onto my phone, like it was a weapon. "What are you doing?" she demanded, pointing. "Why are you recording?" I stopped at a safe distance. "Just documenting the conditions," I said, "since the HOA said they were handling it." Her jaw tightened. "Turn that off." "I can't," I replied. "My lawyer told me to document unsafe conditions." That wasn't true. I didn't even have a lawyer. But the effect was instant. Her face flickered, just for a second, with something that looked a lot like fear. Tom tried to stand and slipped again, catching himself on his elbow. He yelped, pain obvious now. "This is ridiculous," Linda snapped, clutching her doorframe. "Why wasn't this salted?" Marlene spun on her. "We discussed this. Unauthorized salting creates liability." Tom looked up from the ground, eyes wide. "Marlene, I think the liability is the ice." For a moment, no one spoke. Rain ticked softly against cars and jackets. The road shimmered under the streetlights like polished glass. Then Marlene did something I didn't expect. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "You see this?" she said loudly, turning in a slow circle. "This is exactly why individuals should not interfere with HOA-managed property. This is why we need professionals." I almost choked. Professionals who weren't there. Professionals she never hired. My neighbor Greg showed up behind me, boots sliding as he approached. "This is insane," he muttered. "You banned the one guy who actually salts." Marlene whipped around. "This meeting is not open to residents." Greg laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "We're standing on ice. Pretty sure that makes it everyone's business." More neighbors started gathering at a distance, drawn by the headlights, the raised voices, the obvious chaos. Someone nearly slipped, stepping off the curb. A woman grabbed a mailbox post to steady herself. And still no salt. Then Marlene turned back to me. "This is your fault," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You created an expectation. You trained people to rely on you instead of the HOA." There it was. Heat rushed to my face, sharp and clean with anger. "I offered to help," I said. "You told me to cease immediately." She waved a dismissive hand. "That was for safety and legal reasons." "Legal reasons?" Greg snapped. "Tom's bleeding." Tom looked down at his elbow, now visibly scraped. His wife gasped. That's when Marlene's tone changed. Not angry, calculating. "Someone call an ambulance," she said quickly. "This could be serious, and we need to document everything." She glanced at me again. "Especially unauthorized activity that may have contributed to these conditions." I understood instantly what she was doing. She wasn't panicking anymore. She was pivoting. The narrative was forming in real time. Rogue homeowner, unsafe practices. HOA try and maintain order. My stomach dropped. I raised my phone slightly. "Just to be clear," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I have emails from the HOA explicitly banning me from salting these roads." Her eyes flashed. "That doesn't matter." "Oh, it will," Greg said quietly. The ambulance arrived about 20 minutes later, skidding slightly before coming to a stop. The paramedics struggled, just walking from the rig to Tom. One of them muttered, "I prefer this response." "Why wasn't this treated?" the paramedic asked out loud, looking down at the ice as he struggled for footing. Marlene jumped in immediately. "These are private roads," HOA managed. "We were planning to—" "To what?" The paramedic cut her off sharply. "Watch people fall?" That shut her up. Tom was carefully loaded onto a stretcher, every movement deliberate to keep him from slipping again. Linda refused medical transport, but she was visibly shaken, leaning heavily on her husband, her face pale under the streetlights. The board meeting was clearly canceled. No one even tried to pretend otherwise. As people began to disperse, moving cautiously back toward their cars, Marlene pulled two other board members aside. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments drifting through the cold air. Liability, insurance, incident reports. Then she turned and looked straight at me again. "You shouldn't have been recording," she said coldly. I met her stare without blinking. "You shouldn't have banned salt." For just a split second, the mask cracked. Not anger, not fear. Something else. Something like realization. Then she turned away and carefully, painfully made her way back to her SUV. I stood there long after the crowd thinned out, the ice still gleaming under the lights. My phone full of footage, my inbox stacked with HOA emails. That's when I got the notification that told me the situation wasn't over. It was about to explode. Before midnight, the HOA's lawyer emailed the entire board. And somehow, the word lawsuit wasn't followed by my name. It was followed by theirs. The email landed at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I stare at my phone for a full minute, rereading the subject line again and again, waiting for my name to pop up like a delayed jump scare. It never did. Instead, it read, "Incident involving board members. Legal review required." Not homeowner. Not unauthorized activity. Not salt spreader. Board members. I opened the email, heart pounding, and that's when everything finally clicked. The HOA's insurance carrier had already been contacted by Tom's wife. She didn't wait for Marlene. She didn't wait for an internal review. She filed a claim the moment Tom was admitted with a fractured elbow and a mild concussion. And the insurance company did what insurance companies always do first. They asked one question. Were reasonable steps taken to prevent a known hazard? Freezing rain. Private roads. No salting. Documented warnings. I scrolled down, my hand shaking just slightly. The HOA's lawyer had attached a preliminary assessment. Cold. Clinical. Brutal. Based on initial review, liability exposure appears significant due to failure to mitigate icy conditions despite advance notice and available preventative measures. Available preventative measures. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was finally obvious. Marlene hadn't banned my salt spreader because of liability. She banned it because if I salted and someone still slipped, the HOA would look negligent for not hiring a contractor themselves. But if no one salted at all, then in her mind, the blame could be redirected. Bad luck, personal carelessness. She just didn't plan on the victims being the board. The next morning, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Photos of icy sidewalks. Screenshots of the HOA email telling me to cease immediately. A blurry picture of Tom on the stretcher. Then someone posted the kicker. A copy of the HOA bylaws with Section 8.3 highlighted. The association is responsible for maintaining safe conditions on all private roadways, including reasonable measures during inclement weather. Reasonable measures. Salt. By noon, Marlene sent out a new email. This one wasn't cheerful. No corporate smile. No, dear valued residents. Just damage control. The board regrets the incident that occurred during last night's weather event. We are cooperating fully with legal counsel and insurance representatives. No apology, no acknowledgement of the ban, but the replies started flooding in. People asking why the salt spreader was banned, why no contractor was called, why warnings were sent instead of treatment. Then Greg replied with a single sentence that changed everything. Because Marlene personally ordered him to stop salting. I watched it happen. Silence followed for 6 full minutes. Then Marlene replied to the entire list. That is not an accurate characterization. I didn't need to respond, because at 3:18 p.m., the HOA's lawyer emailed again, this time with instructions. Due to potential conflict of interest, individual board members involved in the incident may need to retain separate legal counsel. That's when it hit them. Tom wasn't suing a stranger. Linda wasn't suing the weather. They were suing the HOA, and the HOA was them. By the end of the week, the board held an emergency closed-door meeting. No residents allowed. No minutes published. But the walls in that clubhouse are thin. Later, I learned voices were raised. Accusations flew. You told us it was handled. You said salting was dangerous. Marlene stayed quiet. Because the final twist, the one she never saw coming, was this. The insurance company denied full coverage. Why? Because Marlene's written ban on salting counted as a willful decision to ignore a known safety measure, not negligence, intent, which meant the policy wouldn't shield individual board members from personal liability. They sued the HOA. The HOA turned around and pointed at the board, and the board pointed straight at Marlene. 2 weeks later, another email went out. Subject, board restructuring notice. Marlene had stepped down for personal reasons. Tom resigned. Linda followed. The remaining board members voted unanimously to approve a new winter safety policy. It included one line that still makes me smile. Qualified residents may assist with de-icing efforts with prior notification. Prior notification, not permission. The first freezing rain after that, I hooked up my salt spreader like I always had. This time, no angry emails. No threats, just neighbors waving. Someone even clapped. And as I drove past the clubhouse, spreading salt across the sidewalk that once turned into a lawsuit, I thought about how close this all came to going very wrong. Not because of ice, but because power, when mixed with ego, always slips eventually. And when it does, the people who fall the hardest are usually the ones who insisted the ground was perfectly safe. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription motivates me to bring you even more dramatic and satisfying HOA stories. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. I'll see you in the next story, where justice gets even more satisfying.